Someone is screaming outside your window right now. Not literally, but imagine they were. Imagine it was loud, sustained, unmistakable. What would you do? You'd like to think you'd call for help immediately. You'd like to think the answer is obvious. But in 1964, in a quiet neighborhood in New York City, 38 people heard a woman screaming for her life, and not one of them called the police until it was too late. Her name was Kitty Genovese. She was 28 years old, returning home from work at 3 in the morning. She was attacked outside her apartment building in Kew Gardens, Queens. Her attacker came back twice. The assault lasted over half an hour. 38 witnesses, according to early reports, heard or saw something. And the phone didn't ring at the police station until after she was already gone. The story shocked the country, and it launched one of the most important questions psychologists have ever asked. Not why was the killer so violent, but why did no one help? The answer they found was more unsettling than anyone expected. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't indifference. It wasn't that New Yorkers were cold or broken or selfish. The answer was something far more fundamental. Something wired into the way human minds work in groups. Something that, if you're honest with yourself, you've already felt, even if you've never been in a moment of danger. In 1968, two social psychologists at Columbia University named John Darley and Bib Latane ran an experiment. They brought college students into a room, one at a time, and told them they were about to participate in a group discussion about life as a student. The conversation would happen over an intercom to protect everyone's privacy. What the students didn't know was that everyone else on the intercom was a recording. There were no other real students. There was no real group, just the subject, alone in a room with a script playing through a speaker. During the discussion, one of the recorded voices began to struggle. He mentioned he had a seizure condition, and then, mid-sentence, he started to seize. He gasped. He called for help. He said he was going to die, and then the intercom went silent. What happened next is the part that changes how you see yourself. When subjects believed they were the only one on the call, 85% of them left the room to get help within the first minute. But when subjects believed there were 4 other people on the call, only 31% helped at all. The more people who seemed to be present, the less likely any single person was to act. Not because they were bad people, not because they didn't care, but because something in their brain quietly concluded, someone else will handle it. Darley and Latane named this the bystander effect, and the deeper they looked, the stranger it got. It turns out the human brain does not process crowds the way you think it does. You might assume that more witnesses means more safety, more eyes, more hands, more chances for someone to step in. But your brain doesn't do that math. What it actually does is something called diffusion of responsibility. The moment you become aware of others who could act, a portion of your felt obligation quietly transfers to them. It doesn't disappear. It distributes. And the more people there are, the smaller your personal share becomes. In a crowd of 100, your sense of personal responsibility may shrink to nearly nothing, even as you stand right there, watching. This isn't a bug. It might actually be a feature. For most of human evolutionary history, you didn't live in a city of strangers. You lived in a small band of maybe 50 to 150 people. Everyone knew everyone. Every crisis had a clear social structure. If someone was hurt, the best healer stepped forward. The strongest person stepped forward. The most experienced person stepped forward. The roles were understood. The hierarchy was known. Diffusion of responsibility in that context was coordination, not cowardice. It was social efficiency. But then your world got bigger, faster, more anonymous. And the brain that evolved to navigate a band of 50 suddenly found itself standing in a crowd of millions, with all the same wiring and none of the same context. The mechanism that once coordinated action in small groups now produces paralysis in large ones. There's a second force at work too. Darley and Latane identified it in follow-up studies. They called it pluralistic ignorance. It works like this. When something ambiguous happens, a loud noise, a person slumped against a wall, a scream in the distance, you look at the people around you to calibrate your response. Is this serious? Should I act? You scan their faces for cues. But here's what makes it a trap. They are scanning your face at the exact same moment, and both of you are trying to look calm because you don't want to overreact. You don't want to be embarrassed. You don't want to be the person who causes a scene for no reason. So you look calm. They look calm. And both of you walk away concluding, this must not be serious. Everyone else seems fine. No one was fine. Everyone was scared. But the collective performance of calm told the group that no action was needed. A feedback loop of false information generated by the very people trying to read the situation accurately. Psychologist Stanley Milgram studied related dynamics in crowds throughout the 1960s and 70s. He found that in dense urban environments, people develop what he called mental overload protection. The brain flooded with too many stimuli, too many strangers, too many potential crises competing for attention, begins filtering out events that do not directly threaten the self. It isn't numbness by choice, it's numbness by necessity, a cognitive firewall, and it has the side effect of muffling the signal that should trigger helping behavior. Now here's the part that should make you stop and sit with discomfort for a moment, because you've been in a version of this, maybe not a crisis in an alleyway, but think about the last time you saw something on social media that seemed wrong, a comment that was clearly cruel, a post that was spreading something false. You saw it, others saw it, thousands of others maybe, and almost no one said anything. Not because they agreed, but because they looked at the silence of the crowd and concluded, I guess this is fine. Or someone else will respond. Or it would be weird if I stepped in. The bystander effect has moved online, and in some ways, it has gotten worse. Because online crowds are not just large, they are invisible. You cannot see the faces of the people who chose not to act. You cannot feel the silence the way you can in a room. The diffusion of responsibility is total, and the feedback that might snap you back, the weight of someone's gaze, the sound of their voice, the urgency on their face, is completely absent. But here is what Darley and Latane also found, and this is the part most people forget. The bystander effect is not inevitable. It is not permanent. It is not a law. It is a default, and defaults can be overridden. In a series of later experiments, they found that if even one person in a crowd broke the spell, stepped forward, called for help, said out loud, "This is serious," the group followed. Almost immediately, the effect collapsed. Because pluralistic ignorance depends on ambiguity. The moment someone resolves the ambiguity, the pressure to conform to an action disappears. The crowd, which had been silently waiting for a signal, finally gets one. And it responds. There is also a phenomenon researchers call the identified victim effect, documented extensively by psychologist Paul Slovich. When an emergency is abstract, 1,000 people at risk, a crowd in danger, the emotional response in your brain is surprisingly flat. But when the crisis is individual and specific, when there is one face, one name, one story, the emotional circuitry fires hard. Your helping response activates at full strength. This is why a single photograph can raise more money for a cause than a statistical report about 1 million people. Your brain was built to help the person in front of you, not the data point on a graph. And this is why the most effective thing you can do, if you are ever in a situation where you need help and others are present, is the counterintuitive thing. Do not call out to the crowd. Do not scream into the general air and hope someone responds. Instead, single out one person. Look directly at them. Point if you have to. Say, you in the red coat, call 911. Name them, make them the responsible one. Sever their connection to the diffuse crowd and pull them into individual agency. The research is unambiguous on this. It works. John Darley spent the rest of his career studying why good people fail to act. He believed the bystander effect was one of the most important things a person could understand about themselves. Not to despair, but to prepare. Because the research is very clear that simply knowing about the effect changes your behavior. People who understand pluralistic ignorance are more likely to resist it. People who understand diffusion of responsibility are more likely to claim their share of it. Knowledge in this case is not just comfort, it is a kind of inoculation. So here you are. You've just learned something about the way you behave in crowds that you didn't know an hour ago. You've seen the mechanism behind the silence. You understand the math that makes a crowd of 100 feel like no one's problem. You know how calm faces lying about fear can become the walls of a trap. And the next time you're standing in a crowd and something feels wrong and everyone around you seems fine, you'll know that feeling might be a signal, not a permission slip to stay quiet. The screaming outside the window in your imagination. You'd like to think the answer is obvious. Now you know why it isn't, and exactly how to make it obvious anyway.